There is a story that's been floating around for a couple of days, but it's a story that does not seem to have anything to do with the topic that we've been talking about these last days, which is the power of three. But it does give an opportunity to relate the personal experience of this power of three. In other words, which is there when the body, mind and spirit are in alignment, and when the three levels of existence are merged. And it's a story about many years ago, and many of us were there when I was invited to open and close a Wesak celebration in Uluru. And I think this was about the first trip that we did together, isn't it? And there were about 35 of us. We went in convoy from here, and some friends from Singapore and Brunei flew over and drove down from Darwin to join us. And it was one of those real big New Age gatherings, being the Buddha's birthday and his day of enlightenment. So there were shamans and goddesses and gongs and drums of all kinds there. And there were presenters during the course of the 3 days, I think, that we were there. But when it came to the ending of the ceremony, and the whole place was kind of in darkness, I think, and it was very serious stuff. And the presenters made their final presentations, and it was all very high-flown, confirming about it, so forth. You can get the picture, I'm quite sure. But anyway, when it came time for the microphone to be handed to me, and I waited for that moment when whatever was to be said came up, the story came up, and my immediate thought was, you can't tell that story. But I did. And it was that story about old Fred. 92 years old, and he decides to go to the red light district, and he knocks on one of those doors that's got those little grills in it, and the grill opens and a gruff voice from behind the door says, "What do you want?" And old Fred says, "I want a woman." The grill closes and there's guffawing from behind the door. And then the grill opens again, and the gruff voice from behind the door says, "Old man, you've had it." Old Fred says, "How much do I owe you?" And the parting message to this group, I think 350 or something people, was, are you willing to pay the price? Because the price is everything. That was the ending of that gathering. But what is realized from that is the power of three. The recognition that when it comes to the moment when we're aligned, and when those three levels of life are merged, what arises, which can only be called a power, is so great. Whatever it is to be said or done is said or done. This, to me, is what is that power. And I can tell you, in my personal life, if you ask me what's behind that and what is the greatest lesson of life that is continued to be lived, and that is surrender and obedience to that power. So the story that has been floating around for these couple of days which does not seem to have anything to do with the topic of our power of three, but giving the opportunity to tell this anecdote, is a story of the great BalShemTov, the leader of Hasidic Judaism. And there was that occasion when he gathered all of his hasidim together to tell them what their duty, what their mandate, what their job was as he was about to leave the body. And he came to one rabbi, and I think his name was Yuri, and he said, Yuri, you are going to be a storyteller. You will wander the world and tell the stories of what it is that has been heard and experienced over these years, sharing in my life. Now Yuri was not very happy about this, because that meant that he had to leave his wife and his family behind to go and tell these stories wherever he was guided to go. But like all others who were there with the BalShemTov, what he said was law, and they each of them undertook to do exactly what was given to them as their mandate. So Yuri started to roam the world, telling them many stories and anecdotes of the BalShemTov and the stories that he'd told. But it so happened that Yuri was invited to Spain, where there was a very rich Jewish merchant who invited storytellers from all over the world to come and tell stories in the forums and the receptions that he would give. So when Yuri was invited and greeted by this wealthy Jewish merchant, he was invited on the first evening to tell a story. But when it came for that story to be told, it seemed that Yuri had been struck dumb. No story would come out. So the rich merchant said to Yuri, "No, well, you're just tired from after your long travels. Tomorrow I'm having a reception and I'm inviting all of my friends. You can tell a story then." So during the reception, when Yuri was invited to tell a story, nothing would come. No story came. So Yuri apologized. Nothing would arise for him. So on the third day, Yuri said to his host, "Well, I'm so very sorry that no story has arisen. I'd better leave you now. Thank you for your hospitality." And so he got in his coach and he was halfway down the road when suddenly there was his story. So he turned his coach around. He rushed back to the Jewish merchant and he said, "I have a story. I have a story of the BalShemTov." And so the merchant had him sit down and Yuri told the story. He said, there was a time when one day the BalShemTov said to a group of us, "Come, we have to go to a certain place." And as was often the case, we got into the BalShemTov carriage, and it seemed like in an instant we were carried to this place. Somewhere in Poland, I believe it was. And at that time, it was a Christmas time. It was a Christmas time when all the Catholics of that place were celebrating. But not only were they celebrating, there was one bishop amongst them who himself was an orphan of Jewish birth, who had been adopted by a Catholic family, but come to hate the Jewish people. He was so cruel and so vindictive, he would incite the Catholics of that place to attack, beat, and punish the Jewish people who lived in an establishment, a ghetto perhaps we would call it. Now, when we arrived there, all the shutters of the Jewish quarter were shut down because they had fear that they were going to be attacked, punished. But the BalShemTov said to me, that is, Yuri, go. The bishop is now in the town square inciting the people. You go to him and tell him that I want to see him. And I was very afraid, but I could only do what the BalShemTov told me to do. So I went, and I went up to the dais where the bishop was standing, railing to the people. And I told him that the BalShemTov wished to see him. This bishop immediately stopped his diatribe and followed me to where the BalShemTov was. The BalShemTov took him aside and spoke to him, and I know not the words that he spoke. But after that, the bishop disappeared and was not seen again. As Yuri was telling this story, the Jewish merchant began to weep, began to sob, with tears rolling down his cheeks. And after Yuri had finished his story, the Jewish merchant said, "This is my story. I am that bishop." And the words that the BalShemTov spoke to me were, when someone comes and tells your story, you will know that it is done. Your time of penance will be over. The merchant fell on his knees in front of Yuri to thank him for being the instrument of bringing this story and confirmation for him. Just like that which arises out of us when that power is present, we do not know, not often, what it is that has happened as a result of that power, what has been said or done. But one thing is certain, one thing we learn, one thing we know. What is it that we know? What is it that we learn from this? Our confirmation, our acknowledgement, our absence of doubt or fear, to allow those words to be spoken or that deed to be done that is greater than the sum total of our self-doubts. That power of three. What is it that comes to you as a recognition and confirmation without the need to see the results, not to know what it does, just knowing that it knows what to do, not questioning or having fear what it is that those words or that deed is. What is it for you? Acknowledge it. See for yourself. Do it.